Hello and welcome to the Make Ideas Reality podcast. I'm Justin White, aka the Garage Avenger. Being creative and making is important for ensuring the continued development of society. It is critical for a shared sense of identity, culture, and values. We are coming out of a world-shattering pandemic, one that's brought a cataclysmic series of changes into our daily habits. It has become even more prevalent to embrace concepts like community, diversity, and authenticity. Life is so serious. Creativity is what makes it fun. And if we share this with others, it can transform society as a whole. My guest today, Mike Troxel, calls himself an oddball, which I think we can all relate to as makers. He has a long history of developing projects that bring people together, creating community, and impacting society. We deep dive into his story. He shares with us some of his projects and the impact they've had. We talk about why you as a maker are one of the most important assets to your local community. And Mike suggests some ways you as a little maker in your little workshop can get out and make an impact, engage others, and change the world. If you've ever wanted to leave your mark, then I hope this episode will inspire you to take action. There are those who might shudder when asked to make a 2-story high udder, or those who would stress to make a flying Pegasus. To change the world, one might agree, a small idea can alter one's reality. Welcome to the show, Mike Troxel.
Ah, lovely. That was beautiful. Yeah, nice. That wasn't so cringeworthy. That was actually kind of rap worthy. You should I'd given it some rhythm, you know. But maybe for your next show, I'll do your beatbox for whoever you talk about, and you can throw a cool.
Maybe I should redo that intro, and we can put the beatbox over.
Totally. Yeah.
So welcome to the show, Mike. There possibly is a lot of people listening thinking, who is Mike Troxel? So I thought I'd give you the opportunity to introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are, what you are all about.
Yeah, grew up in Colorado. I was 20 years old. I moved to Chicago to kind of work actually a lot with social justice and poverty in the inner city. There of Chicago, and I met this really wonderful Norwegian girl there about 26 years ago, and now I live in Norway because I fell in love with her. When I came to Norway, I've done lots of projects. Most of my life I've worked with all sorts of different kinds of engagements that worked with culture and people and building things, of course, through music and through videos and festivals and whatnot. I moved to Norway. It's probably been 16 years ago. Kind of what sent me down this trajectory that I'm on now is my son got a skateboard for Christmas. Fell in love with skateboarding at the time, and then it rained or it snowed or something like that. So I went to the city government to find out where the indoor skateboard park was. There wasn't one within about 300-400 miles, I guess. And so I thought we needed one. I went to the commune, to the governmental offices, and said, "Hey, you know, we need an indoor skateboard park for all these kids." And they were like, yeah, we're going to build one. We've been working on it for about 2 or 3 years. And our plan is it will probably start in about 10 years. I was like, 10 years? That's your plan after 3 or 4 years? Is maybe in 10 years? My kid's 10. So what about him? So lo and behold, about 5 or 6 months later, I opened, at the time, one of Norway's largest indoor skateboard parks, called Vision Skate Park, and just, of course, got into it, had to build a lot of stuff myself, pulled in a lot of skate park builders, So that kind of grew me into this cultural world of Norway. Then I started other different kinds of things like a parkour hall. Actually, Norway's, there's my dog. Hey, can you shut the door? I have 4 kids, by the way, so they're all here. Blah, blah, blah. What am I saying? So I ran a skate park for many years. I started parkour hall, and then got really enthralled into this idea of the maker community. Actually got introduced from a friend when I was getting kind of done running a skate park, because I really liked making things. Before that, I had like a bike club where we would take old bikes from the garbage, kind of weld them together into cool bikes. We were called the Recyclers. Blah, blah. And I really wanted to get back to making things like that and actually making tall bikes again. And a friend of mine that I met from the US said, no, that's not what you want to do. Here's what you want to do. And he sent me a video from a guy talking about maker spaces. And it just really set really well with me that was a need for people to have a place to come. So I opened a maker space and ran it for a while. And now I work at a opera house, a large theater opera house, building sets and trying to have fun and enjoy life. Yeah, I guess that's about it. That's a quick wrap up of my last 30 years. Yeah.
So it seems like a lot of your past experience is a lot to do with, building things to engage the wider community and help a lot of other people in the community, I guess it says.
No, absolutely. I've always been geared around that. There's so many oddballs out there like myself, whether it was through music or transient youth culture of the US and in Chicago, to skateboarder boys that were kind of pushed out at school and they're not good at school because they can't sit in front of a teacher for 7 hours a day and not move, which I think that's a whole nother subject. And all of a sudden they're getting this impression that they're not good enough or something's wrong with them. And so to create a space for them where they found out that, no, there's nothing wrong with you. There's actually something really wrong with our system, and how do you kind of gather them into that place? And then when I started to meet kind of the maker community, the creatives, and seeing many of them also kind of hidden away in their own garages or their basements or whatever, creating a space where they could come together and meet others. And then most of our projects and the different projects that I've done have been about collaboration, I should say. So if I was ever called an artist, or if I ever called myself an artist, I think my medium would be people. I like to, when I have an idea, I like to go around and pick the colors that I want to put into my painting, and they're just the right people, getting the right team around to create and to kind of come on board and make something. So I love to just gather, for example, we made it was like about a 25-foot tall marionette that walked through the streets of Norway here on the 17th of May parade. And it was a mixture of some Polish ladies that love to sew, an elderly woman who liked to make dresses, a guy from the oil company who was an engineer who helped kind of come up with a plan for the skeleton, to an old a theater fire blowing creative guy that could come on and help us make sure that we didn't kill anybody on the street, and the old farmer priest that had an old tractor that he came down with and helped us attach it to a tractor. And then when we're walking through the streets, we needed 5 or 6 people just to pull the arms and pull the string so that her arms would move around and her legs would move, and her head was remote control. So it was this whole expression of this strange group of people that would never actually probably have anything in common. but found something in common when we started to build this giant, wonderful marionette woman and walk her through the streets. So that process for me is always, I think, more important to me than what we actually make. Honestly, what I love is that gathering, and then through these different skill sets that you find in different people, them meeting each other, inspiring each other. Of course, I can ramble on about those things.
I kind of wanted to sort of, you touched on, in getting people together and making, I guess, things together, and which changes their world. And I think that comes down to our topic today, making changes the world, in a society that seems to be like even more distant and unengaging, and, where we sit behind screens and even socialize over screens. I don't know my neighbors really. And, cultural events and things are, often not favored over watching, the Squid Game on Netflix or something like that. And it all seems just a little bit grim, but we as makers, I guess, have the power to change this. And though I think sometimes it brings us down with like a bit of self-doubt and a healthy dose of impostor syndrome. I think making is an incredible anti-depressant for most of us, and it's cathartic and it's addictive, and it traps us into like a positive spiral of thinking that can only ever create good people. And for those who are engaged in this maker community, that's clearly evident. And who better to change the world but us, people?
Absolutely. People who are willing to try new things and try and fail and miserably do insane things to make something cool come about. Those are the kind of exact people we need to come together. Absolutely. But I think you're right. As we discussed, a lot of times people feel pushed aside, or they feel like they're the strange one, whether their desire to take apart electronics and figure out how they work, or their desire to take an old piece of wood and carve it into some kind of a statue that started when they were kids finding sticks in the woods, and they still like to watch one kind of a material become something. And they've fallen in love with that process, or they like to whatever, and they don't always have the right people around them to help them understand how that is actually exactly what we should be doing, is kind of pursuing those kinds of creative projects. So of course, how can we create a venue, create a project that draws those kinds of people together so they can meet each other? Kind of like a real analog Tinder without the Tinder part, just a way to get people actually to meet face to face, and sometimes having fun projects or fun things going on, or sometimes it's as simple, I think, as needing help and asking for help. And when you need help, and a lot of what I've done over people write me and call me all the time. Hey, do you know anyone who can make something out of molten steel? Oh, yeah, I know a guy. He's a blacksmith up in the woods. Yeah, he's the guy. Or do you know someone that can laser cut this or 3D print something? Or do you know someone who can fix a couch? Or do you know someone who can, so I've become kind of the connector to a lot of random skilled makers that are amazing. They're just magicians, but most people don't know, so.
You said you worked in a theater, and you also said that your skill is not really making things, it's about putting people together. So like, are you a certified carpenter, or like, how did you get this job working in it's a big theater, isn't it? The Opera House down there in Kristiansand.
Yeah. Of course, most of my life I've been enthralled by making things, from fixing up my room to building things, putting things together. How do you use a saw? How do you create? So most of my life, when I had a kid, I had a bike, I could take it apart, put it back together. Just kind of that instinctual curiosity for how things work and how things function. For a while, I was an electrician, so I could easily understand how electricity flows. It just made sense to me, like the same as plumbing. For me, electrical, exactly the same thing. One's just water, one's electricity. So I can get things like that. So then I started building a skate park for my son, and learning, kind of developing certain skills and understanding radiuses and how you put things together. And then when I opened the makerspace, is probably when I began to see the amazing, powerful tools that are at our disposal now, like CNC machines, laser cutters, plasma cutters, things like that I never knew really existed, and that kind of gave me, as a novice carpenter, the ability to make really cool things without having to spend 15 years in a carpentry school. I loved that, I think so. So that introduced me to those things. And so when I brought those in, and then all of a sudden, again, magically, certain people started to show up that knew enough about some of these machines that they could start, the ball started rolling. And then another person showed up that knew something about this. And I ran that for some years and kind of grew a relationship with a lot of culture people in the city through, just concerts and skate parks and making. And we had a maker fair, and we had lots of different things. And actually the makerspace wasn't doing so well financially.
Yeah, it's pretty common, actually. Makerspace is struggling.
Strange as that might sound. Yeah. So, what we were so successful at was just the magic of making. It was the people and the things were happening all the time, but the money wasn't rolling in like we wanted to. And just towards the end, when Makerspace was I was starting to see that we had to figure something else out. I got an email from a guy at the theater asking if I could just help out for a few weeks in the carpentry shop. And it was coming up to Christmas, and I had no money. I can't make my kids presents all the time. So, sometimes they want a PlayStation, So I realized, wow, this is a great opportunity to make some money. So I went in, and it was just a lovely, huge workshop. I actually convinced them at the time, when my makerspace closed down, to buy the CNC machine that we had, and a laser cutter we had, and some of the 3D printers and stuff. So that's been about 3 years that I've been working at the theater. So we make everything. Whatever the scenographer comes in and says, we want this, then it's kind of our job to figure out how we can make it, and what's our budget, what's our parameters, what kind of materials are we using, what's our time frame, and then we kind of have to figure out what is realistic to make. And so far, we've been able to exceed everyone's expectations, and that's partly because of the team that I have that work with me as well. So that's how I got my job. Yeah.
Obviously there's a lot of like old school sort of prop guys working there, and you brought in a whole heap of CNCs and laser cutters. And how did that go over?
Yeah. At first, definitely they were very apprehensive. There's something with any kind of technology that if you've spent your life making things the old school way, and someone comes in with a machine that you in your mind think can do it better than me, well, then why will you need me? I think sometimes, especially in kind of the old school theater world, they have a very misconception about what these digital fabrication tools can do. It's not like you don't just type in a code and then out comes this big thing. CNC machine it just cuts out shapes. It doesn't put things together and make them work.
Neither does it design it.
Exactly. So So at first, definitely they were very apprehensive and very understandably insecure. How is this going to affect the importance of my skill sets? And so over time, I used the analogy early on about, because we're a theater, we make things that aren't real, So I said, we're like we're a wedding cake company, and nobody is ever going to eat our cakes. So why don't we just get some stupid machine that makes all the cakes, and you guys can use all your time doing the frosting and making it look like magic, and that's kind of the reality of what we can do with these digital fabrication machines is they kind of do the grunt work for a lot of things. Yeah. Still with the CNC, and we have a great CNC machine, still sometimes depending on the project, it's much faster just to use the typical, traditional tools. If I'm just making a box, I don't always have to throw it on the CNC machine. I can just strip it down on a nice table saw and in a much shorter amount of time, make a better product. So as with all things, it's also teaching people that these are just new tools, and they're not for everything. And you can overuse. I've watched a lot of people overuse laser cutters, and all of a sudden everything is laser cut. And there's a cool thing that a laser cutter can do. But there's also something really cool a good jigsaw can do, and it's not always the right tool for the right job. So now everyone's pretty excited. And I've changed over some of my staff too, and pulled in people that have a bit more leaning to at least understanding the digital process.
Yeah.
But always I'm a lover of old school skills. I love, I got one guy, his name is Froda, and he can basically take, a piece of foam, styrofoam, some glue and some paint and make anything out of it. And it just is mind blowing, what he can do with just cardboard and, paper mache. And those are skills that I love and I want to grow. And again, for him too, I want him to be able to develop himself, understand how these other tools can aid our process so he doesn't have to spend 5 days just doing all the grunt work so he can get to the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Basically, I can, within, 4 or 5 hours sometimes, he's in there doing the magic and the painting and the sculpting that brings it to life. And they realize very quickly that they love these machines. Yeah.
So let's talk about impacting your community, because you've been involved in lots of projects like you've just mentioned earlier, and I feel like a lot of them have had some impact on the community. What were the biggest projects you've been involved in, and what was the biggest impact they've had on people, do you think?
Of course, some projects are building a skateboard park, indoor skateboard hall. That was a big project that had huge impact. I think for me, some of the simplest things have had the biggest impact. Riding, for example, on a tall bike, which is just, again, where you take one bike and you weld another bike on top of it and you sit up a bit higher, has been something that has brought me so much joy, but also I believe real impact into the community. Because when you ride on a tall bike and you come down the street, people have this idea in their mind what a bike is. They just think this is a bike. And all of a sudden they see someone on a bike that's a bit taller and their brain kind of goes, and 90% of the time they burst out laughing and they smile and they engage you. I've had conversations with, I remember driving past like a convertible Maserati, and the guy in the passenger seat was hitting the guy in the driver's seat like, dude, check him out. They're looking at me, giving me like, whoa, dude, cool bike, And I'm like, literally pulled these frames out of the garbage, welded them together and riding them through. And they're sitting in $1 million car, giving the thumbs up to me on this weird bike. You know, I've talked to women in burqas with their kids, and their kids are laughing. The women are like, "Hey, wow, that's so neat." People that would never engage. Why would they talk to me?
100%. Yes.
But when you have this kind of spontaneous, unguarded moment with people, with something that's a bit creative and fun, it makes these connections, and we can enjoy this moment together. And I love that. You know, I love just spreading that kind of joy around and increasing that. So that has led to other things as well. Led me to putting on a bike parade, for example, yeah. Where I convinced a bunch of my friends to join in. We started off, I was going to be 2 or 3 of us just riding on tall bikes, and we were going to kind of make them into something cool. And it turned into over 40 people getting bikes and turning them into anywhere from a spaceship to elephants to all sorts of random things. And one day during Corona, we just put on a parade in the middle of our city. And the only rule I had for everybody was it can't be political. It can't be a protest and not like a religious statement. This is just about fun. You know, we had been, for that year, we'd been hit by Corona and everything was sad, and we had other things to concern ourselves with. And all of a sudden, for one day, we could just bring joy to people, and it was just magic, And again, the people, even some of the people that joined that, probably wouldn't have joined something otherwise. But because it was so large and a lot of people could be involved in it, some people made the most intricate, amazing, giant bike sculptures that you can dream of. And some people came with the most simply decorated bikes that almost weren't decorated. But in their capacity, they could join into this crazy experience because they could join in with their bike, and their imagination took over. And that was, I think that's still having impact. I still have people stopping me on the street saying, "Hey, when's the next bike parade?" So yeah.
I was going to say, I think as makers and creatives are innately good people, and when we have the power to make a difference in our local community because we have this creative mind that can come up with amazing ideas. What do you totally. what do you think makes makers and creatives, I guess, as well, an important asset in society today?
Well, I think that anytime, and I'll stretch it from, I'll tell you why I think so, and I'll stretch it from makers and creatives to the lessons I learned from hanging out with skateboarders. I met so many 12 to 15-year-old boys, mostly, who didn't fit into normal sports, didn't fit into normal schools, but they were innovative. They were self-determined. They would practice all day. They would think outside the box. They thrived because they came into an environment where there were no rules. You can express yourself through what you do. There's no right or wrong way to skate. It's what works with you. And so many of these boys I saw were sometimes marginalized, but actually they're exactly what we need in order to push our world forward. Are people that are willing to take risks and to fail. With skateboarding, I watched boys try to learn to do a kickflip, and they failed 1,000 times, literally, before they made their first kickflip. And then still they fail. And they know that failure, you will not become a good skater if you don't fail miserably. If you haven't broken at least one bone, if you haven't smashed your elbow, if you haven't gotten this giant shred mark across your body, you're not going to get good and come to the point of freedom. And I think that lesson I pulled over to what makes generally makers and creatives essential is their non-fear of failure. Failure in our culture is looked down upon, but really it's the source of any innovation, and whatever we get, failure has to happen. And so when I see makers come in and they're, we're making a giant wing right now for a giant Pegasus horse. And the first trial of the wing, I should have it. It's just, it was terrible. Like, you hold it up and it goes flonk. It's just, none of the things worked. It just didn't. It was an absolute catastrophe. And we laughed and we put it back together. We looked at it and we made some changes. And 3 or 4 iterations later, we had what we wanted, and that non-fear of failure, I think that is so prevalent in the maker community, is what we need. And that's probably the thing that stands out to me.
Don't you think also the willingness to learn from others as well? Like, not to sit on their high horse and say, I'm the best at this. Like, that's what I feel like we are really good at.
Yeah. But then I think that comes from that reality. When you fail 4, 5, or 6 times, and you reach out to somebody and you're like, why doesn't this work? And they go, oh, we'll try this.
I feel too like we just, there is that innate, like, okay, I failed at this, like, and I'm willing to go for some help, to ask some people about their opinions on this weird thing that I'm building, like, I feel like there's a difference between, for example, us as makers, and which ties us more to creative side than, for example, like, let's just say, like, model shipbuilders or something like that, because the model shipbuilders are trying to make something that already exists often, right? It's not like their own design ship. They're often trying to replicate a miniature version of, a ship or a car or whatever, right? So there's not really any of that, like, troubleshooting type of thing, I guess, in what they're doing. Whereas we who make things that have never been made before innately have to ask for help, because at some point you can't know everything. So I feel like that's a really great thing we have.
We're just so psyched about getting into things that we get way in over our heads.
Story of my life.
But that's beautiful, because like, maybe I'm a good carpenter and I can do the carpentry, but all of a sudden I realize I need a machine to make this work, or I need electronics, or I need something that I don't know, and I'm too far in, and there's a whole skill set that I realize I need to finish this well, and that helps me reach out to find the blacksmith or the electronics guy or whatever to help me, because we tend to go bigger than we should. So yeah. I'm sure you can relate to that. Yeah.
It's like every single project, nearly. I'm like, what were you thinking, you imbecile?
And then your friends start to know, because I have a lot of friends, and I'm like, hey, I got another idea. I'm gonna do it, but I'm gonna do this kind of small, and they're all like this. Yeah, right.
My wife says,
it never stays small, Mike. So
my wife always says things like, "Don't overcomplicate it, Justin." And I'm like, it's gonna be fine, babe. It's like, this one's gonna be easy. I'm just gonna program this app, and then that will communicate to the machine And she's like, do you know how to do that? I'm like, no, but it can't be that hard. It seems
Yeah,
pretty
I have
simple.
YouTube. Yeah. So then you get way deep in, and then you got to just cry out for help. And I do think that that's the beautiful, I mean, that's a human thing. You know, it's hard to ask for help. We all want to be superstars and be able to do it alone, you know, but we never can. And so I think that is also a huge superpower of the maker community, is their quick willingness to ask for help and to give help, like you were saying too. I think their ability to not be afraid of failure actually gets them too far into projects that they should have been afraid of.
Yeah.
Which then leads them to have to reach out to get help. And because they need help, they've gotten help, they're willing to give the same help. So it starts this amazing cycle. And we all know how it feels to be in over your head and need desperately someone to help you. And it feels good to sometimes be that person instead, to be able to come in and go, hey, let me help you, you know, for all the good karma that I need because I've gotten so much help. It feels good to come around the edge and be the guy going, are you sure you want to add 7 buttons to that project? You know? Yeah. So yeah. I've said it a few times now, but I think that's a life lesson, you know, that helps us be better husbands, fathers, wives, helps us be better workers, helps us be better communicators when we're able to ask for help and to give help, you know. So
I feel like many of us are self-proclaimed introverts, though, in the making community. Definitely not myself. I definitely call myself an extrovert. But I think a lot of us are like that, you know, and we're pretty, despite the fact that, you know, you are potentially introverted, you're still okay with asking makers, you know, for advice and help and that sort of thing. But you mentioned in your TEDx talk about breaking outside the cultural bubbles, and being that we are kind of generally on a general scale, like most of us are introverted and often in our sheds tinkering alone and you know, and reaching out on the internet for help and looking at YouTube videos. Like many of us find it kind of hard to socialize outside of these, you know, cultural bubbles, you know, with the wider community. You have been involved in a lot of these projects, you know, the skate park, the parkour hall, you know, the makerspace. You're now working for the theater, and you know, the myriad of other events and things you've done. What are the benefits of breaking out of these cultural bubbles, getting out of your comfort zone, you know, your little tinkering shed or, you know, that sort of thing? On what's your opinion on that?
I mean, of course, human relationships are everything, that's what it's about, you know, really. So when we cut ourselves off from each other for whatever reason, in the long term, we're never going to be who we should be. I think we stop, we cease to grow. And I think that the one thing that I know of most of my maker friends is this kind of insatiable desire to learn and to grow, to develop, to move forward. If I'm doing this thing today, I want to be doing the next step tomorrow. I want to keep learning and building, because as human beings, we want to keep developing ourselves. But human contact, of course, is a critical part of that process. So, but it's not easy. And that's why I loved our makerspace as long as it was. And that's why I love makerspaces anywhere, is that they do create this low threshold way to come in and start interacting with people. But it's not just about the introvert. I think that would probably be my point. To communicate to the introvert that you need to move out of your your small world and get input and build relationships. I think everyone, they know that. I think the challenge is we become homogenous. That I start to hang out and talk with people who also like what I do. And all of a sudden and there's a place for that. And don't get me wrong, there's a place to geek out with your friends and whatever you're into. And there's a place where, but if your circle of friends are people who agree with you, think the same way as you, follow the same trains of thought as you, then you do limit your ability to grow and to expand. Just like if you only work with wood and carving knives, there are other tools, there are other things you can grow in, and you can implement other ways into your skill sets. And I think as humans, we need to be careful that we don't just become centered around small groups of people, whether that's, you know what I mean. I'm sure you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was the basis of my question, because, I feel like we are in our little maker groups on Facebook and we've got our Discord chats, and we have our maker meetups and things like that, which is awesome. But at the same time, are we isolating ourselves to only hang out with those type of people? Why are we not sharing our passion and skills with other people in our community, that perhaps can not only enrich our lives, but we can enrich theirs as well?
Absolutely.
I mean, it just makes me think about different cultures. I grew up in Australia, where there's a lot of cultural, multiculturalism is the word I was actually looking for. I really didn't have I grew up eating Chinese food as like a normal thing we had for dinner, that's the thing. But then you get here in Norway, and they are very stuck in their traditions and their ways. And sometimes I always think, imagine if they just knew how good some of this stuff is out there, and how much life could be more interesting and more, just better, I guess, if you knew what else was out there. That's my point, really.
I think when people ask me, I live in Kristiansand, which is southern Norway, and people often ask me, "Oh, do you miss America?" And generally, my response is I don't really miss America, but I miss good, cheap ethnic food. A wide variety. In Chicago, you could eat Thai for lunch and Vietnamese for dinner and Mexican for breakfast and, Polish, and you could eat every kind of food from the world, Indian food and different kinds of Indian food and Northern Indian, you could just, but here it's Norway's a small country and small towns. And so you don't have that diversity, and I miss that. So in the same way, we can start missing that diversity of people in our lives. So, but I think that actually the maker community, I'd say too, of course we need to work, but the maker community as a whole is amazingly open and diverse, cross things, there's, when I first went to my first maker conference, I was amazed at the wide variety of people that were there. That we had, it was a maker fair in Paris, actually. And you had people that were painting little signs, little artistic signs. You had people that were 3D printing. You had people that were carving out things. You had good old boys that were just, taking big logs and, using a chainsaw to carve them out. You had old people, young people, men, women, highly educated people, self-educated people. You had, I was impressed at how diverse the maker community was when I first came to it, especially at a large maker fair that it was. So,
I think my point.
I think maybe your point was life is not about the Maker Faire. How do you engage your
Yeah, I mean,
community?
I literally like, how do you walk out your front door and use your
Yeah,
creativity to impact someone and their life? You know, like you could be your neighbor,
yeah,
could be someone, that's what I'm more talking about. I feel like we have the
true,
chance to do
true.
that, and that is kind of our superpower because we are not scared to fail and we try things that others wouldn't. We have
Yeah,
this impact. We can have this impact to inspire people to also, you know, not be scared of failure and try things. And it may not be making. That's the thing. Like that,
yeah,
that
true,
it,
true.
it may be just, they decide like, well, geez, Justin, is working hard at this project. Like I'm pretty inspired. I always wanted to do like travel and maybe I could do that, and they finally, buy the ticket they always wanted to buy and they start traveling.
Mm.
Is that sort of impact. And then, when you meet someone on the street, like, you talked about a tall bike and meeting, people on the street, like that's the impact you have because your creation just came from outside the garage, like from inside the garage or a workshop, and now is
Uh,
out in public where people can interact with it. And I
so,
fully relate to that because when I was about 14 or 15, I had built this like lowrider, you know, dragster type bike,
yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah,
And people, and it was the 1990s, so that was out of fashion. Or sorry, it was early 2000s, so that was out of fashion. But people loved it, and like
yeah. Of
the
course they do.
people
Yeah.
that grew up in the 80s, like were all over that. Like in the 70s and 80s, they just like, oh,
Oh,
look
yeah.
at the banana seat, how cool,
No,
right?
of course,
You know, uh,
nostalgic. Oh,
I was like, oh, you need a bigger sissy bar on that. Like I had a 3 foot sissy bar,
yeah,
and
yeah,
so
yeah,
that like engage, like when I wheeled that thing onto a train or something to go to school or to wherever I was taking it, it would
yeah.
always engage people. People would always talk because I had this giant monster like speedometer on it, and like I had done all this crazy stuff on it. It looked completely stupid, actually, if I think about it. But like at the time, I thought it was way cool, and
It
people
was
would,
Michael, of course.
yeah, people stopped me, and started talking to me, and that you never know what that could have had impact on
Yeah,
someone, like,
yeah.
oh yeah, that guy, has the balls to ride around this weird bike, like all of a sudden now I'm gonna wear that weird like knitted like jumper I made because I'm actually proud of it.
Yeah,
You
totally.
know,
Of course, and
so
maybe that's part of it too, is that we can remind people. Of course, it's not easy for everyone to do this. It's probably easier. I also am a bit more extroverted than introverted. So I like to go out and ride my tall bike because I get a lot of energy from the attention I get. Some people attend too much attention is opposite, and it's they can't bear it. So of course maybe it's easier for us, but that's also why we can create bigger groups so people that we can kind of spread that attention out a little bit.
yeah.
But I was going to say something else. I wasn't going to talk about that. But
Do you have,
that impact that we have on people. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, do you have any recommendations? Like you've put yourself out there a lot. Do you have any recommendations to people who maybe want to try getting out there, just a little not really sure where to start or what to do, how to engage with a wider community?
I mean, of course, it can be as simple as finding, depending on how connected or disconnected, just Googling online to see if you can, is there a maker community in your area? Are there maker people that are doing something? Is there a project in your town going on that you could help? Is there a kids program going on and you're a coder? maybe you're a IT guy and you can share your skills with the local Red Cross, for example, or you're a 3D printer guy or girl that's just really into that. Maybe find out if down at the local kids place they need someone to kind of just inspire them, look for ways to share the weird skills you have. Generally, people are happy to see weird skills. And sometimes the maker community, I have to say, we're a bit too, we race too far ahead sometimes in a good way, but that also makes it, people still don't even know what a 3D printer is, there are still people that think they have no cognitive understanding of what it is. So when they're like, oh yeah, I can 3D print stuff, they're just like, you're talking some foreign language. So we have to find ways to show them. If you do, quickly people love weird stuff. I think. I don't know. So it takes initiative for sure. But there's a lot of people that want to see it. Go to an old folks home, elderly home, and just say, hey, I've made some cool things on this thing and I'd like to show them, and see who comes, and just show them your creations or show them your talent or your skills and start to just share it. I guarantee you'll meet some really interesting people. Most likely, I find, and I imagine you've seen it too, the kind of the older generation above us, like our fathers and their fathers, they know how to make things the old school way, So if you ask them a little bit, hey, look at this thing I made, they're like, wow, what kind of a file did you use? And they're quick to want to talk it through. When we we have this big horse that runs through the streets, and it's amazing to watch the old guys just stand there and look, and they're mesmerized by the gizmos and the mechanics of it. And then they just start talking to you simply because you're there and they're intrigued by it. So just get out, I guess. What would you say? What would you suggest?
Well, I mean, I start thinking about people like Hans Meyer, who was the first guest on this podcast ever.
Yeah.
And, he is in the local community there, very active. He runs a kids maker evening, I think, at the local library, and he just brings stuff. And then it's funny because he said to me the other day when I was talking to him that, the parents get, jealous, they're like, oh, that's cool. I would love to learn how to do that, and so the kids, and I think that is what makes the big difference, because after a while, their kids working on this stuff, the parents might say, well, you know what, maybe we'll invest in a 3D printer, and deep down, dad always wanted one, and he's like,
exactly, yes.
And then before you know it, he's like going crazy and posting things on Thingiverse or whatever it's called, and making his own impact in the world. And I think that is what we have the power to do if we share what we do with others. I think that example is just one of, I don't know how many ways we could do it, but I think the community or the your local town or council or whatever always has space for this type of things. You've just got to dig around and find it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I was talking to you earlier in this pre-podcast that we took, and I was like, I really should get out there. I really should do something and be part of something, So I started thinking about projects I could do with people that were already sort of involved in the council community, local town sort of engagement already, so that I didn't have to jump through hoops to try and find how to get involved. I would maybe attach myself to someone that is already kind of in it already. and then just piggyback off them to take it and make my own impact in this local community.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And maybe one idea too could be to force yourself to learn a skill on your next project that you don't have. For example, upholstery or sewing, or some maker skill that is completely out of your norm, that kind of forces you to meet a whole nother group of. When was the last time you hung out for an evening with a bunch of older ladies knitting?
Yeah.
And got to see their passion for what they do. And then you find out that actually, what if I was able to knit something and they could help you knit something, and then you could then in turn help them make a cool stand for their knitting needles. You know what I mean? Like, be creative in how we need help and learn from other people, kind of spend a month doing something else. Learn to make food. That's my favorite makers are the food makers,
Yeah, that's a great way to make friends.
Yeah, very good way.
Well, before we get into the rapid fire 5, I kind of want to just take this chance to thank all my patrons for their support on this show. You guys really, I don't take you guys for granted, and I want to thank you guys for supporting the show, and of course, Garage Avenger YouTube channel and all the other stuff I do. I want a big shout out to the top tier heroes, Stian Suhus and Sylvester Arneson and Andreas Wallman. And again, thank you all so much. You guys are absolute legends. If you guys also want to be part of the GA Nation, as I'm calling it, go head over to Patreon and support this podcast and the shenanigans on my Garage Avenger YouTube channel. I hope to see you guys there. Now, let's get into the rapid fire 5. You ready?
I'm good. Bring it on.
All right. What's something people get wrong about you, Mike?
That I make lots of money. I don't know. I remember lots of kids would say, "Oh, you own the skate park?" And I was like, "Yeah." They're like, "You must be rich." And I wasn't.
Kids always have a false sense of our reality, don't they?
And also people think that when you are able to make crazy contraptions come to life, they think you must have a lot of money. I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head. I have enough money. I don't have lots.
No. I think that's all you really do need, isn't it? Like,
exactly.
What's something you like to do that has nothing to do with making?
Nothing to do with making. That's hard because I like playing the guitar, but that's still making, creating.
Actually, this is a bit funny because I've started asking this question, and a lot of people kind of fall into that trap. Like, damn it! Everything I do.
I love making food. I love making food, but that's still making. I like drinking good cocktails that other people make for me.
What's a project that is completely priceless for you and that you could never sell?
There's not many things that I ever sell, honestly.
No.
Money, I like to give people things, trade things to people. I don't think I've ever sold anything. And the things that I did end up selling, I always wished, I don't know, I don't like money, honestly, in that exchange. So is there anything that I have that I wouldn't want to get rid of? Probably just small things, things that I've had since I was a kid, or things that I went to my uncle's house and pulled out some, as his house was getting ripped down, I pulled out some pieces of his house, from an old lamp to a grill that was on the vent, an old vent. So I have some stuff like that are just hanging on my wall that I would never want to get rid of. I But there's nothing that I've ever made, because generally the things that I make are way too big to keep.
Yeah.
So in the end of the day, and they're also so big that no one can buy them, because where are they going to put them?
Well,
So,
where are they going to put a giant Pegasus and or
exactly.
a 2-story udder? Like
Yeah. But if someone came and they offered me a lot of money, if it was the right person, I think that's more important to me than the money. But if it empowered me to make something new and to do another thing, then, but money itself doesn't motivate me. So I don't know. Yeah.
what does happiness look like?
Wow. I forgot that was on the list.
Is it riding your toll bike?
Oh, maybe, in one sense, happiness is being free and riding through a city and having people smile at you and smile back and just connect. But also, I think good, honest relationships with people around me. I think that's having good people around me, I think, is probably my most favorite thing. Yeah. So I think having the right people around you and good, honest relationships, that's what makes me happy. And then maybe like Bali and a pina colada for 3 months would be really happy too. Something very surfacey, like a beach somewhere, is also really happy. I feel happy when I'm on the beach. Yeah.
Well, I think, I think you're the first person to actually say relationships as part of happiness. And I think that's really important to actually state. It's like, if we're alone in this journey, with the wrong people always around, we're never going to be happy. And I think having the right people around you is just so important to your own sanity and happiness.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, the last question. Who should be the next guest on the podcast?
Like anyone, I would love to hear a podcast with the shitty robot girl. Have you heard of her?
Is this Simone Goetz?
I don't even know her name. I think she's Swedish. I don't remember.
Yeah, Simone.
She goes by the shitty robot girl, or something like that. I love her. She's so beautiful, and I love what she makes, and I love that it never works. And I would love to hear a talk with her. I could think of more people, but I'll just leave you with the shitty robot girl.
I'm pretty sure you're talking about Simone Goetz, and I'm gonna be super impressed if I could get her on the show. That would be so awesome.
Right on, man. Go for it.
She's like a maker superstar. So
of course she is, and that's why she's cool. I think I saw her on Stephen Colbert once, even.
Yeah. Super amazing. All right. Well, I think that's about it, guys. Look, we as makers are a special breed, and we can ultimately change the world by sharing our creativity. And it doesn't need to be on a gigantic scale, but more importantly, I guess on the micro scale, to engage our wider local community in our cities and townships. And I hope through this little chat we've had on this podcast, we've inspired you to get out there, get out of your comfort zone, and go change the world just that little bit in your own way. If you enjoyed the show and you thought, it was worth telling me, please give me your feedback. Send me a DM at Garage Avenger on Instagram. Thank you, Mike, for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. Remember to change the world by igniting your creativity and making your ideas reality. I'm Justin White. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep pushing yourself, keep ballsing up things, keep learning, get inspired, and I'll catch you on the flip side. There we go. I'm done.
Beautiful.